Okay. Hi. I just finished reading Kingdoms of Death by Christopher Rocchio.
Squidward, are you okay? No.
And to share in the spirit of Hadrian Marlowe's suffering, I will be recording this review with my windows shut to block out the construction noise outside, despite it being bloody hot today. Don't say I don't do anything for you, Marlowe. Before we go any further, I should mention this is going to be a full spoiler review. Okay, now here's the thing. I kind of saw this book coming. I mean, first of all, it is heavily foreshadowed in the text that there is going to be a point in Hadrian's life where he is a prisoner of the seal sin and horrible, horrible things are done to him. It's foreshadowed through his own visions and it's foreshadowed through his own hints as well in the text, since he's writing at a later point in his life, reflecting backwards. But also, I kind of knew this was going to happen because I watched a booktuber rank their favourite books of the year, and they kind of ranked Kingdoms of Death lower than other Sun Eater books that they read that year because of all the suffering that happened within it and how it was just kind of a hard book to get through. It was mostly a spoiler-free discussion, but, you know, I went into this book expecting suffering, and boy was I rewarded. But here's the thing about Kingdoms of Death. Maybe it's just because I was forewarned about this sufficiently, but I would not rate this lower than any of the previous books. In fact, this might be my favourite book in this series so far, and I promise I'm not a sadist. But maybe it's my favourite book because of how it overcomes the thing I was concerned about it falling into. I've read books in the past such as The Way of Kings or Half a King. Those books sound very similar in name, I've just realised this. But anyway, those are two physical books I can point to. I say physical, I own one of them on Audible, and say that these are books with a kind of a heavy emphasis on the protagonist, or one of the protagonists, suffering in captivity that I find take away from the book a little bit. And I know The Way of Kings is a masterpiece, don't get me wrong, but even within The Way of Kings, and maybe Words of Radiance, I forget how long it lasts, it's been a long time since I read those books, it's just... It's a little much. It's just a little much. It gets to the point where I'm like, I know, I get it. I know they're suffering. Can we move the plot forwards? I think it's more prevalent in Half a King. I know that the protagonist getting captured, enslaved, put in captivity, tortured, this stuff is important to linger on because it's going to be some of the most important parts of their character moving forward in the narrative. But I think that sometimes it can just drag a bit, Maybe I'm just not as negatively affected about reading about horrible things happening to characters that other people are. Maybe other people don't feel like it's proceeding slowly because they're too busy being horrified by what's happening. I'm just like, oh, yeah, that's kind of fucked up. Anyway, or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe I'm more affected by how fucked up things are, and therefore it feels like it's dragging. Either way, what I want to get at is Kingdoms of Death circumvents this in a really interesting way. In Kingdoms of Death, and this isn't the only part of this book, we will talk about the other part of it, the earlier part of it, later in the video. I know that's kind of weird, but that's just how we're doing it. In Kingdoms of Death, Hadrian becomes a captive of a seal sin, and he is tortured and he is just generally put through the ringer. We spend 7 years with the seal sin, watching Hadrian getting just horribly, horribly abused. But Christopher Rocchio makes it interesting. In those chapters, we are not just watching Hadrian get tortured. I mean, first of all, the framing device of the narrative is probably a big part. We're also listening to a later Hadrian recount how he was tortured, and you get an impression of how that might have affected him going forwards, which just innately lends a whole extra layer of intrigue or interest. It's background radiation, don't get me wrong, but it's there. And I think just the mastery of the prose helps as well. Like, I could read anything Hadrian Marlowe wants to talk about, man. I know it's Christopher Rocchio writing as Hadrian Marlowe, but I eat that shit up. He's so melodramatic and I love it, and it's warranted in this book. There's a point towards the end of this book when he's on Colchis and Gibson makes some reference to him being melodramatic, and he's like, yeah, but don't you think I've earned that by now? But anyway, what the main things that make those chapters not just not just sufferable, but interesting, is we also use those chapters to learn about Sealsin culture. We use those chapters to learn about the history of the Sealsin with Elu, and we learn about, you know, the Mudanar and the skull of Mudanar, and we go there, we see the cave paintings. We learn about the Enar, a predecessor race, a crab-like race, who were basically the Sealsin before the Sealsin, and we learn about their ultimate demise. And in a twisted way, I even want to say that the horrors that Hadrian are subjected to are unique and interesting, like hanging him by his shoulder over, like, it's stark imagery. It's horrible, it's horrific, but it's also really gripping and interesting and flavorful. The fall of the Red Company is not only emotional and deeply upsetting, it's also a hell of an action sequence. Christopher Rocchio takes the idea of an action movie where our heroes get picked off one by one towards the end, and he implants it in this book with not just the heroes of an individual story, but the friends that we've made along the entire series, and watching them get picked off one at a time is so tragic and moving and upsetting and really well done. It was exhausting as well. I did take breaks. It was exhausting getting free of that world, which there are a lot of nouns, bear with me. AU. Getting off of AU was exhausting to read. Like, I remember thinking at one point, I was like, can we just skip the Tamerlane part? Can we just, like, say, and then I got to Valka in the Tamerlane? Like, it would be worse storytelling, but I'm just ready to get off this rock. But yeah, just the imagery as well of them dragging the Tamerlane down out of orbit and having it crash into that ancient city as well. And then, like, his friends stumbling out into the danger and the open air and stuff, and how emotional Hadrian feels about it. Just, oh, pure cinema. It is the absolute worst case scenario, and there aren't many books that are willing to actually take us into the worst case scenario they present and go, yeah, and then that happened. And this is the midpoint of the series, by the way. Until now, Siriani Doriaca, I don't know how to pronounce that, he was kind of a bogeyman. Like, you know, obviously we saw him at the end of a previous book, and that was fraught and good and stuff, but he was still, you know, like a hologram in the sky and everything, and it was still kind of ghost stories that were told about him. Another thing that Christopher Rocchio does to make Hadrian's imprisonment interesting is he gives us conversations between Hadrian and Siriani, and he showcases not just their differences, but also their similarities, and how under different circumstances, and if Siriani had different dispositions towards humans, they might even be friends. You know, if he hadn't chomped down on Hadrian's digits and swallowed them whole anyway. But yeah, in many ways, this book felt like it could have been the final book in the series, because it's just so final in so many ways. We see the deaths of so many characters, and the irreversible damaging of so many more. And the beauty in this book, the parts where it had me tearing up, was after Hadrian escaped, and just him recovering and reflecting and mourning, and his time on Colchis. I cried twice. Firstly, when he fell to his feet at Siran's grave and started piling up graves for his Red Company, for the individual members of it. And again, of course, when Gibson died and he realized that he would have to face, you know, going back to the Empire and reality and his job and all that stuff. The way those scenes were written were just so profoundly touching. I would be surprised had anyone reached this point in the series and read those passages and not felt some stirring of emotion. And I think those are the reasons why this is my favourite book in the series so far, because there is so much suffering, and it is so realistically written, or at least from the outside looking in. Obviously, I've never been hung from my shoulder from a cavern ceiling, but I think some of the stories which touch me the most emotionally are the characters which have been through the most, and we've been through it with them, and we see them rise afterwards and stand up and continue, and, you know, them exploring their grief and stuff, grief as well. It's just, it just touches me so deeply. But the one last thing I want to talk about, because it's not really a nitpick, it's not really a criticism, but it is something that bothers me the more I get through this series. And that's, first of all, we're focusing on the Lothrian Commonwealth part of the book, which I think was fantastic as well. It's always really interesting to see these other types of civilizations, human civilizations that exist within the galaxy, and their relationship to the Empire, and I feel like this is our first time really going to one of them and exploring it in detail. A lot of the time, this kind of stuff happens off screen. And the Lothlorien Commonwealth is taking one idea, taking one belief, and taking it to its absolute extreme. Like the idea of everyone being equal, and then forcing that upon people, and then the entire language being based around what you are approved to say. There are approved sentences. I've not read 1984 yet, but from what I understand of that book, it's very 1984. And for the most part, I really, really enjoyed that. But there were a few things which stood out to me, which I'm just kind of squinting at a little bit. First of all, the idea of the government-approved bodies, the new man, and it's not really a gender, it's agender, it's genderless, or I guess sexless. And you know, looking back now, this is clearly supposed to be foreshadowing that they're trying to model their society after the Sealsin in some ways, because they have decided to ally with the Sealsin, much to their own future detriment, I am sure. And all throughout the Lothlorien Commonwealth, we do see the hypocrisy within its leaders who insist that they're not its leaders, but they're allowed to speak freely, and they've been sacrificing the populace to the Sealsin in order to appease them and stuff like that. There's plenty of evil in the Lothlorien Commonwealth. And this is not the first time that evil has been attributed to messing with the idea of gender, and I might just be being suspicious, or this could just be a result of the narrative coming from the very conservative perspective of Hadrian Marlowe. Like, it's very dangerous to try and assume an author's beliefs based on the story they are telling, because whatever story you tell as a writer, you are telling it from the perspective of a fictional character, and usually that fictional character's beliefs are going to differ from your own. But when this is a fundamental construction of the universe that's being put together, yeah, I start to raise my eyebrows a little bit. It's a small thing. It's something that's probably not as big a deal as I'm starting to suspect, but it keeps happening, and I'm like, what are we doing here? And of course, you could argue the opposite, because of course, forcing a population to present as a certain gender is probably one of the most evil things I can imagine. And it is presented as such, it is presented as evil, so you could be saying that he's arguing that people should be allowed to present as their true gender. And by true gender, of course, I mean chosen gender. One's chosen gender is one's true gender. But I don't know, there's little passages and certain ways that Hadrian speaks and thinks about gender that raise my eyebrows sometimes. So far, the story's been very inclusive in other ways, so at best or at worst, it's probably just an oversight. But it does raise my eyebrows alongside every time Hadrian talks about the idea of transhumanism and replacing parts of your body with machine parts as being disgusting, although I am more willing to attribute that to his in-person conservative beliefs and empire upbringing and all this stuff. But yeah, I'll be interested to see if that comes up within his character by the end of the series. But yeah, Kingdoms of Death, 5 out of 5. Easily the best story so far. Next up, Ashes of Man. I'm excited to continue this. I should also mention I was going to read the Tales of the Sun Eater short story series. I did actually almost finish volume 1. I think I stopped halfway through the final short story. To me, it was good. It just broke up the pacing of my read through a little too much. And while I did get some stuff out of that, like I got the story about the Demons of Array, which is actually fairly central to the overall plot of the main series. It might actually be a little bit of a mistake to leave that out from the main books, in my opinion. And while I got that really fun short story from Halford's perspective, which really helped drive home his death and his head ending up on the Sealsin banner at the end of this book, or at the end of that portion of this book, there are too many stories which, while they are good on their own, take place within the Sun Eater universe separate from Hadrian's story, to the point where I'm just hungry for more. And it's not like the novellas, where the novellas are like, you spend a time in either a portion of Hadrian's story or someone adjacent to Hadrian's story in a meaningful way. It's more, I don't know, it's more separate. I think I'm just going to go back and read them all after I'm done with the main series, or when I'm waiting for book 7, because I'll probably finish before then. So those are my thoughts on Sun Eater. Thank you for listening. Hopefully you're still around after I started talking about gender. I know that upsets some people. Just remember, at the end of the day, we're all human, and everyone deserves respect to be who they truly are. It's really not that complicated, and it really should not be that controversial. And I'm probably being paranoid about nothing in terms of subtext, but I did Google it and I saw other people raising eyebrows too, so it's not just me. Anyway, I will catch you in whatever I make next.